question about whether to trust polls and which polls to trust is one that we'll return to often between now and November. And that's because it's a pretty complex topic. There are many different types of polls and many different types of polling problems. So I'm going to just address them one by one. Starting with election polls. At this time of year, many who express distrust of polls are talking about those election predicting polls. Now, there's always been skepticism about that, but the distrust really spiked after Donald Trump's surprising victory in 2016. For many, and especially many conservatives, the polls were way wrong that year. They should never be trusted again. In reality, the polling in 2016 was pretty good. It was the analysis by a group that I call low information elites that was wrong. Don't believe me? Well, the national polling averages showed that Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote by 3 points. She won by 2. That's pretty good. In fact, closer than it was in either 2012 or 2020. Now, some say, well, that's okay. The national polls got it right, but the state polls were horrible. Once again, a look at the data shows just the opposite. In 2016, it was really easy to show, based on polling, how Donald Trump could reach 263 electoral college votes out of the 270 he needed. He just needed to win one more state. Now, in that election, there were 3 states that surprised everyone: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But it wasn't the polling that was wrong. In 2 of those states, Michigan and Pennsylvania, the polling averages showed the race to be a toss-up. And by the way, in both those states, the very last poll showed Donald Trump slightly ahead. The only place where the polls really missed the mark that year, Wisconsin. Despite that, if you looked at the polls, pundits should have expected that Donald Trump had a very credible chance of winning. All he had to do was pick up one more state on top of the 263 electoral college votes, and 2 of them were a pure toss-up. So why didn't the analyst expect this? Well, because those low information elites, and remember, they were presented as experts, they couldn't imagine it happening. I happened to be in the green room at Fox News on the morning of that election. The discussion was talking, of course, about election night and about the polling averages. And somebody noted that, Clinton's up by 3, but there's always a margin of error. So a lot of people said she'll probably win by 6. One person in the room said, oh, no, the polls are off. She's probably going to win by 9 or 10 points. Now, I didn't expect Donald Trump to win that night, but I had been saying on air for weeks that he was close enough to throw up a buzzer beater. It could happen. And by the way, only one person really got it right. My friend, the late Pat Caddell, he saw something that everybody else was missing. But the point is, the polls were showing a realistic possibility that Trump could win. The low information elites just couldn't imagine it. So in this case, it was not the polls that were wrong. It was the analysis of the polls. The lesson for this year? Well, if you're looking at election polling, start by looking at the averages. Don't focus on just one poll, and especially not a poll that shows results you like. If the polls show that a state race is close, say it's close. That's all you can tell, especially 5 months before Election Day. What this will do is it'll give you a better sense of what to expect and a better understanding of where you might be surprised. Those are my thoughts.
Well, what I really like is the new term, low information elites.
It really irritates me when a lot of columnists and political elites talk about low information voters as if they're deplorable or stupid. It is insulting and condescending. When in fact, we've talked about this before. Among the elite 1%, they think that everybody in America agrees with them, and they are just so mistaken.
It's that, or they think they're so much smarter that if we were just as smart as they were, we'd understand why they think the way they do.
But in fact, the low information elites just don't understand an awful lot about life in America. They don't really try to understand, and I think that's a big part of the problem.
Last week, the Supreme Court rejected a lawsuit aimed at restricting the access to the abortion pill. But when we look at the numbers, there is opportunity to find common ground. And Scott, according to the numbers, what are the perspectives that Americans have about abortion?
There is actually, not in the political world, but in real-life America, a lot of common ground, starting with a very basic fact. 73% of voters say The reason this is a difficult issue is because 2 lives are involved. Now, that doesn't surprise you.
No.
Doesn't surprise anybody. But it's a great example of how the political process makes something pretty divisive. Conservatives, pro-life supporters, when they hear this, they say, yes, those crazy liberals need to remember there's a baby involved. You know what? They know there's a baby involved. Most people who are pro-choice acknowledge that there's a baby involved. What the liberals say is the conservatives need to remember that there is a woman involved. So they only talk about one side of this, even though everybody knows 2 sides. There are 2 lives involved.
Yeah.
This moves to our next issue, which is people tend to think very strongly that a woman's right to choose should be protected. The choice should be made early in the process. But again, the political world makes it divisive because they want to say, how early? Now, nobody walks around thinking, does early mean 13 weeks, 7? There's just a visceral feeling that at some point that child is entitled to its own life, and the choice should be made before then.
Yeah, and I think your next number shows us something about this, the pro-life dilemma.
The pro-life dilemma, the movement right now seems to be saying we want to coalesce around maybe a 15-week ban. That's because polls show most people would support it. Here's the problem. 91% of abortions take place before the 15-week ban.
So if you're talking about the issue, it's almost moot for a huge majority of the abortions to start with.
Right, and many of the remaining 9% that take place after 15 weeks, those are special circumstances. And there's another part to this dilemma, which is even though most people say they support a 15-week ban, a majority does not support any kind of enforcement, not even a slap on the wrist for a medical professional.
That's really interesting because, especially when you look at it from various state perspectives, you do have differing opinions there. But again, the key thing is to keep in mind, we're not talking about a large percentage of these, these operations.
And when you talk about state-by-state differences, the stricter the laws are in a state, the less support there is for enforcing them. Happens across the board. So, what happens? Only 28% of voters think that stricter laws will lead to fewer abortions. And just wrap your head around that for a moment. This applies to Republicans and Democrats. Why? Well, because we have lots of laws that don't have any real impact. They're on the books. People recognize it's a cultural issue rather than a legal issue.
Yeah, and that I think is interesting because it's not one of those things where you think the government can make a law and all of a sudden that solves everything. It just doesn't. There are choices that are still involved. And, but everybody wants to you don't want abortion. You want to be able to reduce abortion regardless of where you are in this argument.
But the way to do that, well, it actually starts by recognizing that there is a woman involved. There is a lot of support for a variety of programs and efforts, by the way, cultural, faith-based, government-based programs to help women who are in difficult situations, because that's where the real crux of the matter is. 61% favor government programs that would help women in these situations, encourage them to carry the child rather than have an abortion. And we find details in this, lots and lots of examples, lots of detailed issues where people are saying, why don't you help that woman, not force her to make one choice or the other, but to make it a little bit easier. Now, this one, I know that you have strong feelings about.
You think? Yeah. Takes 2 to tango, baby.
That's right. Two people make the baby. 79% say if the man gets a woman pregnant, he should be financially responsible, not just for the child, but for the mother of his child.
The 79% to me seems low, because this seems to me like because I'm a woman, maybe, but it does seem common sense because there are 2 people needed to do this. And, think about it.
It's common sense, it's fairness.
And this actually, I think, is something that most people really can come to terms with, that nobody wants an abortion. You want healthy children that are loved and are wanted and are cared for.
We want healthy children. We want children that are cared for. But what we want is fewer abortions. It is not a debate about what is the perfect law or how can we make this law more effective. The debate is how do we reduce the number of abortions. By a 3-to-1 margin, Americans say we'd be better off like that. And that really needs to be the goal.
Focus on the positive.
Focus.
Children that are wanted, that are cared for, that are loved, and improve our country. It's time for Rasmussen's Roundup, and we turn to another type of responsibility, leading the nation. With both major party candidates making headlines in recent weeks, trust, accountability, that's what's on the minds of Americans. And in a landmark interview with Dr. Phil, Donald Trump had a noteworthy response to Dr. Phil's question.
I am going to put the American people first, not getting my pound of flesh first. You got to do what you got to do, but I'm going to put this country as the shining city on the hill. I am moving forward. I'm not playing the retribution game. It stops with me and it stops here. What if you took that approach?
I'm okay with that. I am. I'm okay with that.
So, how do voters feel? If Trump wins, do Americans want him to go for that revenge?
Which Americans? We asked the question a little differently than Dr. Phil framed it. We talked about what if Donald Trump announced that he would pardon Joe Biden because he doesn't want the country to go through this ever again. 37% of voters said they'd be more likely to vote for him, 35% less. Republicans are saying no. He should go after the Democrats. He should go after Joe Biden. Democrats, though, are saying, yeah, this would be good. I think the reality is it's very difficult to ask a hypothetical question. It will depend on how Trump framed it. What would probably happen is there will be some voters who said, well, he reassured me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay, top 3 issues for voters. Let's get to what you really do care about the most. And starting with, inflation?
Yeah, look, the top 3 issues haven't changed very much all election year. Inflation, number 1, immigration, number 2, and then overall economic concerns, number 3. These are the things that matter to voters. These are the things, more than anything else, that will determine the election. And on all 3 of these, Donald Trump is trusted more by double digits than Joe Biden.
Really? Okay, so with inflation, Trump 46%, I think you found?
Yes, an 11-point advantage, 46 to 35 on the most important issue of the day.
And what about immigration?
Well, there it's his biggest lead, 17-point advantage for Donald Trump on the issue that, people are seeing stories coming out of the southern border all the time.
I don't even want to look at it anymore. I mean, it's just a wave.
Right. Well, and we see the same thing, by the way, on the third issue. When you look at the economy, Trump has a double-digit lead once again. What's fascinating about this, think about this. Joe Biden's job approval rating and all the polling averages is the lowest of any modern president.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is trusted by double digits more on the top 3 issues. So why is the election close? It's because Donald Trump's baggage is bringing him back in. It's the only reason Joe Biden is competitive at the moment. We don't know what will happen 2-3 months down the road, but right now the issues are favoring Donald Trump and the Republicans. The only top issue that Joe Biden has an advantage on is abortion. And that's seen as the most important issue by about 9% of voters.
And that's interesting because that really is a fairly low number there.
Right.
I mean, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, everybody thought that would be the big issue, but it doesn't seem to have panned out that way.
Hasn't worked that way, but with some segments of the population, it still is.
All right. When we come back, we dig into the mailbag and answer your questions, plus America's view on fatherhood. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Scott Rasmussen Show. I'm Edie Hill. Before the break, we learned that according to polling that was conducted this week, voters trust Donald Trump more than they trust Biden on the issue of the economy. By the way, if you go to YouTube during the week and you just want to find some really good numbers, you put in the handle, The Scott Rasmussen Show, and he put some things out there that you would like to see, I'll bet. So check that out. We had 20,000 of you check that last week. So now it is time to hear from you. We go into the mailbag. If you can right now, see the little QR code right down there on your screen? If you take a shot of that, it takes you to a page where you can ask Scott any question you want. Now, Scott, before we dig into the mailbag, take a look at this headline. Biden apologizes to Zelensky for congressional delays to U.S. aid. So, Scott, we looked in the mailbag, and one of our viewers wanted to know just about that. Is the U.S. spending too much money on foreign aid?
A lot of voters think it is. If you just ask directly about Ukraine, people's kind of views are mixed. They don't really know what's going on. We put it in the context of should we be spending more money on Ukraine or on border security? 45% said we need to spend more money on border security. 24% said both equally, and only 19% thought we ought to be putting more effort into Ukraine. So in terms of context, Joe Biden is on the wrong side of the fence on this one. Not really a surprise because border security has been a weak point in his administration.
And it seems like when people are asked about questions, you think about what's going on at home first.
Right.
Like, you know,
Always the
help me
case.
first, and then
Right.
go on. Now, it is Father's Day. By the way, congratulations to
Thank you.
So what's the view of America on the importance of fatherhood?
73% of voters say it's the most important role a man can play. We talked about a similar number on Mother's Day, and that's absolutely right. It's certainly the way that I feel. I've been blessed with two boys who are better men than I am, and my wife keeps all three of us in line.
And one of the issues that I think people do talk about is whether it's how important it is to have a
Right.
two-parent household, a father that's involved.
Right. 55% of voters tell us that, if the father's not present, the children are at a disadvantage. Only 25% disagree with that, and the rest really aren't sure. When we probe specific aspects of raising a child without a father present, it's clearly something most Americans wish could be avoided.
All right. And let's go to the all-important number not to forget.
The number not to forget, 73% of voters say the issue of abortion is difficult because two lives are involved. Bottom line, there's a lot more common ground on the abortion issue than we commonly talk about. Well, that's it this week for the Scott Rasmussen Show. Stay connected with us all through the week on YouTube and anywhere else you might find us. For Edie Hill and the entire team that helped put this program together, I'm Scott Rasmussen. Happy Father's Day in America. Have a great week.